But welcome everybody to our weekly webinar. I really appreciate our guests that are giving their time today to talk about branding and consumer sales. I also appreciate everybody who is tuning in today to listen. I think it is important that we acknowledge that, right now in a lot of our communities in the US, we're going through some really difficult times, necessary times as we explore, me as a person of some privilege as a white man, the both covert and overt ways that racism is impacting friends and communities and colleagues and coworkers and other people out there. So I recognize it's a tough time for everybody. Often it's easy to come into these calls on Monday morning and say, I hope everybody had a great weekend. That doesn't really feel appropriate right now because I know that there's a lot of pain out in the world right now. So I just had to acknowledge that. I also have some resources coming up in a slide talking about ways that people can get involved or resources that folks can look into. But I still, and I do look forward also to our guests, Jen and Eli, in addition to providing their insight on branding and consumer facing goods and products and how companies can navigate this. I'm also very interested to hear, I know 100 Monkeys has basically pro bono work that they offer every year to companies. Jen, in addition to your work with Mother Tongue, you're so involved as the founder of She's the Roaster and other initiatives. I want to make sure that we can sort of talk about some social issues as well today and carve out a little space. So with that, our guests today, as I said, are Jen Apodaca from Mother Tongue Coffee. She's the Roaster, the Roasters Guild. It just goes on and on. Jen's somebody I've looked up to and admired in coffee, and just kind of a rock star to me. So I'm happy to call her a friend and happy to have her up with us today. Thank you, Jen. And Eli Altman from 100 Monkeys, an amazing agency that really helps companies to nail down their brand, their identity, beyond just a logo. Really, I think it's so fascinating, Eli, that you really get down into like the nitty gritty of just identifying a name, things that some people take so casually, and what you've really contributed to the world in the books that you've put together. That's really special. So I want to give both Jen and Ellie a chance to introduce themselves, as I've been gushing a little bit. And we will get into some of the content. But, I think first, as I said, Umeko was originally due to be with us today, but is unable to, partly because of a lot of the work that she's doing really front and foremost to support the communities of color and the protests that are happening and really getting funds to people who need them directly. So I encourage all of you to check out her Instagram story, her Instagram feed. And these are just 5 of the many organizations that she has direct links to if you're able to contribute to these communities from, Oakland, so close to where we all are, or of course, Minneapolis and pretty much every city in the country right now. So again, I just wanted to acknowledge that and thank Umeko for what she's continuing to do with with the greater community and the larger social good, even though she's not able to join us on the call today. So Jen, I loved this photo of you winning your award. And I just kind of copied and pasted your bio though for folks to read, but can you just tell us a little bit about yourself and your background and Mother Tongue Coffee, of course?
Yeah, of course. So Mother Tongue Coffee, I just started last May, actually. So it's my 1-year anniversary having my own company. And that makes me sound like, I guess in terms of my son, who's 12, a noob, like I'm new, but I've actually been around for roasting for a lot of companies for a long time. So let's see, I've worked for several companies like Blue Bottle. I've worked for Intelligentsia Coffee. It's been for probably, gosh, I guess over 17 years now, I've been roasting coffee. So I've had the pleasure of roasting professionally on several different types of machines. I've met a lot of people. I've had the opportunity to work with the Roasters Guild, and I feel lucky that I'm in a position where I feel very like confident in my skills and solid where I want to be in coffee and what I want to do. So um, beyond that, I guess like I don't know. I love to volunteer. I like to help people. I was once that person who didn't have anyone helping me. I felt like I was in the dark and didn't know who to turn to when I had questions. So I think that's kind of why I do so much volunteer work with Roasters Guild. So like right now I'm the chair of the Coffee Roasters Guild, and we're working on trying to reach communities that don't have access to a lot of things that the European roasting community and the roasting community in the United States have had a lot of access to education and events. And so we're really trying to focus on how to be truly a global guild. She's the roaster I started mostly because I was volunteering in competitions, and there was this competition with 40 different roasters, and they had all of them come up on stage, which was really cool. And it was nice to see roasters on stage, and they were all men. So that made me feel like I was underrepresented. And it's true. There's lots of times when you have somebody comes in and wants to talk to the roaster and they're looking for somebody with a beard, not me at all. Even though I am wearing plaid today, so I feel a bit lumberjackish. But She's the Roaster just really sort of took off. A lot of people, it was just a visibility campaign, which sounds like just a visibility campaign, but sometimes really easy grassroots campaigns that people can like latch onto can be really inspiring and popular, and they take on a life of their own. So I do a lot of stuff, and I love baseball. Thank you for having me on your webinar. I feel like I'm talking too much.
No, that's perfect, Jen. And we have a chance. I put together just a couple of slides for you to talk against. One is the She's the Roaster logo, and the other is your mother tongue roast logo. So I'll give you more of a chance to explain and talk
Great.
in depth about those programs, because I think they're both fascinating. And I remember, yeah, it was a little more than a year ago when I got my first little bag of mother tongue coffee at Expo. So
Yeah,
it's
that's
really
right.
exciting. And Eli, the creative director of 100 Monkeys. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background, and even your intersection with Boot Coffee?
Sure. Hey everyone, my name's Eli Altman. As Marcus said, I'm the creative director of 100 Monkeys. As opposed to Jen, I am a coffee noob. Everything I learned about coffee, I probably learned from Marcus and Willem, which I guess takes me a fair bit above average, but compared to you all, my place is much more about branding, writing. So 100 Monkeys is based in Berkeley. We focus on brand writing. So at its smallest, that's a focus on naming, helping companies, products find good names that fit their positioning and sort of how they want to brand themselves. Then we also do a lot of writing for websites and brand evaluations and all sorts of things to help people sort of present themselves in a way that really fits and feels natural. I've written a couple books. The first one's called Don't Call It That, which just came out in its third edition. That's about how to name things. It's a workbook. So if you're in a position where you're, trying to name a company or, a coffee or anything like that, that's a good resource. And then Run Studio Run, which is about how to manage and grow a small creative studio. Started, I think I met Willem maybe 10 years ago at this point when our studio was in Mill Valley. And we've been working together sporadically ever since. So it's really grateful to know you guys and be able to partner with you over the years.
No, that's great. And I'm so excited to have you both, because I really do feel like you both are experts in your own right and come at this from such different angles. Eli, I think you may be the first guest after 10 of these sessions that's not explicitly working in the coffee industry. So I really appreciate your, kind of more like overarching, more global, like, kind of a specialist view, right? To add to this. And Jen, and I think we kind of talked by email and text a little bit, and you're in the weeds, you're living this every day. Your company's a year old, which I'm sure some ways feels like a lifetime, but in other ways, like you said, you're a noob. So
Yes, absolutely.
So I'm just really excited to hear, like, Jen, what your process was to come up with the name of your company. Even with just like hashtag She's the Roaster, which seems so functional, but to me it really resonates powerfully. And Eli, of course, you can talk maybe some about some of the most successful companies that you know of from a branding perspective and what makes them successful. It doesn't have to be coffee, it could be outside of that, right? So,
sure.
So I'm really excited for this conversation. And Jen, back to you. Here you are cupping coffees in your natural, one of your natural habitats. Could you talk just a little bit about, I think She's the Roaster. We'll also talk about Mother Tongue. I'm also really curious, because I feel like so many coffee professionals that I really respect and the companies that they're a part of, there isn't a definitive line where the company starts and the person starts, right? You're kind of all in it, your personal identity, your company identity. And so I'm curious to hear about that too.
Yeah, actually, that's one of the things that I find to be the most difficult is, now that I have all of these things. So with She's the Roaster, it was a hashtag to put, just to bring notice that, the idea was like, well, it took us a long time to come up with the name She's the Roaster, actually. But, and I don't even know if I remember what some of the other hashtags were, but the idea was that, when you come into the room and with the hashtag She's the Roaster and with the image of a woman who's roasting, that we could like honor each other and sort of like recognize each other for the work that we're doing. A lot of times it's really tough to get women to be like, I'm the roaster, like, and it's really tough to get women to just sort of talk about all of their accolades or their expertise. But it's easier if you can tell other women, like you can say like, you're an expert roaster. You've been doing this for 7 years. She's the roaster. She's the one who calls the shots. She works on the machine. And so I think that's why actually it became a successful campaign, was because we were able to honor other people as opposed to trying to feel like we were propping ourselves up, if that makes any sense. And then, I mean, the branding itself is, that's me in a Sharpie. So I'm a little punk rock, like, I think like, like collage art and zines is kind of where any of my like designiness comes from. So I just sort of made up that typeface, I think it's called. Anyway.
I love it. What was the process like when you and your sort of co-conspirators and She's the Roaster were coming up with the name? What was it like, brainstorming on a whiteboard? Was it 100 text messages back and forth? What?
It was brainstorming on GoToMeeting, because it started in this competitions committee with the Roasters Guild. So because we were talking about like, what can we do? Like, how can we encourage more women to just compete in the roasting competition? And then that led to several conversations with me talking to women who are amazing roasters, who've been, roasting professionally for more than 5 years. And then having this conversation with them, and they're like, well, I'm still learning. And I'm like, you're not learning, you've been roasting for 7 years and you're the head roaster at a very respected roasting company. Like, you're an expert.
Yeah.
Just no one called them an expert before, And so that's kind of how the hashtag came about. So.
No, I think it's really powerful. And it's, I was sort of lucky enough to come up in coffee and up in roasting with like Lindsay Bolger as a inspiration at Batdorf and Brunson when I was there. And
Right.
and then boy, yeah, when I kind of got out of that bubble and stepped into the larger world, like the lack of diversity there was just shocking. And, I can imagine, we have She's the Roaster, but what other initiatives do we need to have for coffee entrepreneurs, for other
Right.
jobs in coffee?
And I'm sure there's plenty of them, and I welcome all of them. I mean, She's the Roaster is it's a grassroots campaign, and it should be like anybody can use it. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not trying to own it. I'm not trying to approve of people to see who can use it and who can't use it. There's just several. I mean, it's out there, and hopefully one day we don't need to have it anymore. Right?
Yeah, totally. No, well, thank you for creating that platform. I know it was a major inspiration to me when we started launching our scholarship programs, and you had already started offering scholarships, and the fact that it is kind of open source, but under the guidance of some people that I really respect was really powerful.
Absolutely.
And let's talk about your new baby.
Yeah. So then again, so this was made on Google Slides or Google Drawings. So free Google design platform. It's my designer friends notice how off-center it is. But I think that, so for me, what happened was I needed, I knew what I wanted to do. I knew what my mission is. And I knew what kind of coffees I wanted to roast. I knew who I wanted to buy them from.
Can you start with that? Can you tell us what those ethos are?
Sure. So I knew I wanted to buy coffee from coffee producers that paid farmers well, or took care of the people at their level. So what I want is, I want to buy coffees where throughout the entire supply chain up to me, including if one day I ever have employees, everyone is paid not just fairly, but well, and I want people to like their job and prosper from, make a living, not just get by. So there's specific farms I work with, like I work with Myra Powell and Catracha, and like she's very transparent with how much she pays people. I work with Rosalba Cifuentes. It's the same. I work with Janine Peterson. I mean, it's also, I didn't set out to only work with women, but it does turn out that way. If you like, it just seems that it ends up becoming that way, where a lot of women producers, they find that this is really at the center of their values too. Like, they want to help the women that are growing the coffee and selling the coffee. And so, everyone needs to get paid. And so anyway, so I knew the coffees that I wanted. I knew I wanted them to taste like, but I didn't know anything about branding or what I should even call my company, for that matter. The naming took forever, the name of a company. So I feel like scared to talk about it because Eli knows so much about this.
Oh, you did great. You nailed it.
Oh, good. Like, I think we just came through with like all these things, and they were so bad. Like, it was like my favorite like song titles and stuff. But in the end,
who was like your, you don't have to name names, but
sure.
People in your life, who were your advisors? Like, that you were bouncing these ideas up, of course. Yeah.
My partner, Ben, poor guy, he's like, oh God, we got to talk about what she's going to name her company again, But he said something, and it's funny because he said mother tongue, but he said it in Latin, and I don't even know what that is because, but once he said it, and then I'm like, what does that even mean? And then he said mother tongue, and I'm like, oh, that's it. That's perfect. It just sort of popped. And for me, I am a mother, but I have 2 kids, and so that it resonates. But really, like, when I think of the word mother, I think of nurturing, and I think of trust, and I think of like taking care of you. So in a way, like mother provides some type of like trust and hospitality, all wrapped in one. Plus it's not mom, it's mother, which is like sort of more strong and masculine, which is, I'm kind of more of a stronger masculine type of woman. So that resonated with me. And then tongue is just crazy because it's like all about like palate development. And then like, you know, like I cup all the time. I'm a Q grader. I'm a cup tasting champion. Like this is what I do. So in a way, I feel like mother tongue is about trust mostly. And that what I want is for people who buy coffee from me to trust that I'm not only giving them delicious coffee, but trust that I'm giving them like I don't want to say righteous coffee, but you know, like guilt-free coffee, I guess, in a way. Yeah.
That's awesome. I mean, seems so powerful to me because it does. I mean, as you said, you're a mother, and you know, of course, I know you personally and you with your kids, but I also know you professionally and see how you are around, you know, younger folks in our industry and in our business and in events, and you know, the way that you're a leader, and it all just really resonates with me. And Annalisa, one of our listeners, just typed into the chat window. She asked, how long did it take you to come up with it? And also just points out, you know, mother tongue is like our first language.
Absolutely.
So there's this really interesting duality going on there. And Annalisa then says the first language of coffee is cupping. So that's
true.
I think it's firing in all cylinders for her.
Yeah, it really comes around. And then like when I did my branding, you know, I was so worried about not having like an iconic image or like, you know, like having my own like personalized custom, you know, typeface or any of those things. And I talked to a friend and they said, you know, Jen, just get out there. It doesn't matter right now. Like, in fact, like later on when you can afford to like maybe go through this with a designer and think of something more permanent, rebranding's a tremendous opportunity. Anyway, like it's a marketing strategy anyhow. Sorry, that's my puppy. What? So that kind of gave me like the freedom to just go for whatever I could do, you know?
Yeah. I really love it. I think it's great. And yeah, and the idea of rebranding or pivoting and changing down the line, right? It's, I've talked on these other calls before, and probably to some of you one-on-one about, you know, my experience with Stanford's D School, and they have this whole idea of design thinking where it's like, let's build something, put it out there and change it if it doesn't work, right? Like you can spend all of your time planning, or you can just kind of jump in the deep end and figure it out and adapt as you go.
Absolutely. In a way, I am just like those women who are like, oh, I've only been roasting for 7 years. I'm still learning. Like, you know, when I first got into coffee, I was supposed to start a business right away. I was taking small business classes and I was an apprentice somewhere. And then, you know, it took me 17 years before I felt comfortable enough or like expert enough to actually do my own business, you know? And I was like, well, what am I waiting for? You know? So, yeah.
That's awesome. That's great. Thanks, Jen. And I'm sure, you know, it'll be good to hear from Eli here in a moment as well. So, Eli, I'll tee you up, and you know, I guess maybe I want you to kind of be freeform as well. But my first question is, does that idea of kind of design thinking and just putting something out there to get started, does that terrify you in your role, or do you see some value in that?
No, I think that's great. I think a lot of it has to do with sort of your personality and like what motivates you. I think it's a fairly, you know, common thing that people put themselves in a position where they feel like they always want to learn more or always want to get to a point like closer and closer to perfection before they're willing to share, particularly if it's sort of like a first move, like putting a first thing out there. But you learn so much from being out there and from interacting with people, and interacting with your audience and sort of hearing what people think and what works, particularly when you're small. And so, you know, like we have this thing at 100 Monkeys where we say like branding is just like life, where people try to think that branding is something that you need to have like perfectly dialed and with all the rules laid out and everything happens in a box, but it's not like that at all. You know, branding is living, and your experiences dictate how people perceive the brand. And as more people interact with your brand, you know, it sort of takes on meaning that like the graphics or the words you use can't really convey on their own. And so the sooner you get out there, the sooner you have these interactions, you start learning. You know, and Jen, to your point about like learning and sort of working towards being an expert, it's almost like I kind of like the inverse of it, where it's like the natural state you're talking about is like always learning. And everybody is always learning. And whether you decide to call yourself an expert or, you know, or not, as feels, you know, more like in the kind of confidence sphere. But even if, you know, people at the peak of their game, like should be learning every single day. And if you're not, you're probably kind of losing interest in what you're doing. Because at least to me, that's like one of the most attractive things about, you know, about work is this opportunity to sort of learn from your experiences and apply those things to what you do all the time. So, you know, I think it's really important for people to sort of take branding and design out of this sterile place, where, you know, it's like Swiss and perfect, and, you know, into sort of more of a realm that feels human, that feels personal, that shares like our personal values and what we care about, particularly in an area like coffee, where it's like, it's so global and it's messy and there's agriculture and, you know, shipping. It's like, you know, it's this sort of massive thing that involves, you know, everything from, you know, technology to farming and everything in between. And to me, there's like nothing perfect about that. It feels a lot just kind of more organic and messy and creative. And so if your brand can reflect some of those values, to me, that feels more in line with, you know, with something people might be interested in than something that just sort of feels very restrained and dialed.
Yeah, I really like that perspective, Eli. And it's, you know, well, you didn't exactly say it, but by putting yourself out there, you're getting that sort of customer feedback too, right? I mean, not just on the product, but on every other aspect of your brand. And when
Yeah,
you're
and
starting out, it's like why, you know, a huge focus group, which is super expensive, probably doesn't make sense when you can test the waters with friends and family and kind of initial fans and dipping your toes
yeah,
in. Okay.
and you know, and I think a really important component of that is about like understanding who your audience is and like who you really want to communicate with. Because just because you get feedback doesn't make it good feedback necessarily, particularly with branding. Like people are willing to say, they'll say all sorts of shit just to throw something out there. People love to have opinions on, you know, on names, on brands. And, you know, particularly with names, it's like if you come up with a name and then you tell 10 people, hey, I'm thinking about calling my company this, you're going to get 10 different opinions. And that's not going to put you in a better place to make a decision. So really focusing on like whose input you really value, who your audience is, and even being willing to do that at the exclusion of other people who, you know, might be into something else. Because like coffee is a very mature industry from a branding perspective, meaning there's a ton of companies out there. Lots of them have very good branding, you know, that's done by professionals that like on a regular basis. There's lots of great names, lots of great logos. So you're not going to out design like companies who've been doing this for a long time. That's not going to work. So to kind of come up with your own perspective, your own voice ends up being incredibly crucial in developing your brand, because without that, you're just going to try to copy what's already out there and everything's just going to feel derivative, and that's not going to help you. It's not going to help your industry. So like, while I think this real world, like interaction of, you know, working with working with your audience, understanding what's important to them, what they care about is crucial. Just because you get feedback from some corner of the internet or someone at a trade show or whatever, doesn't mean you have to pay attention to it or listen to it.
Right, right. So yeah, I mean, I think, you talked about companies that sort of have this identity and things. And right from your website, boring companies have boring names. Coffee, as you said, is a super mature industry. We don't have to talk within the bounds of coffee, but can you share some examples of what you think are very strong names? These could be clients you've worked with or just people out in the larger world.
Yeah, sure. I think one area we've been looking at a fair bit recently because of some of the work we're doing is beer, which I think is very similar to coffee in a lot of ways, in its maturity as an industry, particularly with regard to branding. So you can look at lots of people who name their brewery after their town or something like that, and that's nice. And there's some sort of community involvement that's likely, or you would hope is going on there. But then look at a brand like Arrogant Bastard Beer, or we did one in San Francisco called Standard Deviant. It's this thing where like those just feel different and you're not going to forget them. And particularly in these mature industries where there are hundreds, if not thousands of companies who are, good at branding, who are trying to be interesting, who are trying to be creative, really just that gut check of like, does this feel different? If I put this name on, or this logo on a sheet of 20 names and logos of various, competition, will this one be the one that pops? Will it really feel different? Be honest with yourself about that. Look, there's examples from all sorts of industries. I keep a massive list of names I like that I just run into. I think the main thing I look for though is just people who aren't afraid to be different, people who sort of communicate something that feels meaningful to them, that you see coming through in other elements. I mean, I think Mother Tongue's a great example of that, in that like there's the name, but then there's the story. And so how you talked about the name after you shared the name, to me, is like as important, if not more important than like the actual words themselves, because it connected you to what you're doing. And I think that's really important for an audience to be able to see. And anytime you get that opportunity to be able to talk to someone about what you're doing, your name tees you up for that pitch. It's like my company's called the 100 Monkeys. So if I go to like a, dinner party or whenever those things ever exist again, if they do, and people say, what do you do? And I say, I work at 100 Monkeys, guaranteed follow-up question. Guaranteed, everybody asks. And that's just kind of inherent in the name. It begs that kind of response. I think you can do that in any industry. So just think about names that get a reaction. Like it says up here, boring companies have boring names. So like, if you can pick, your name is like the one piece of your branding that can go absolutely everywhere, that can fit itself into like conversations, which visuals can't. And so if your name is effective in those situations, that means that it gets somebody to ask a question or gets a response, gets somebody to engage. Because if, they're in a situation where they're looking at like 100 different coffee companies or something like that, like, why are they going to pick you? How are they going to get to that level where you can actually have that conversation with them? And if they just say, oh, Mother Tongue, that's interesting, why are you called that? Like, boom, there's your pitch.
Yeah, I wasn't prepared for that follow-up question, actually. Like I was like, oh, great, I got the name. Check off the list. And then somebody was like, oh, Mother Tongue, like what, why Mother Tongue? And I was like, it was like a great opportunity to explain it, but I hadn't like rehearsed any idea of how to make it sound great. So I realized like that you have to be ready for that follow-up question.
Yeah. And, and it can evolve too. Like it can, it sort of can fit the situation, and you can sort of see how you want to position it relative to, the audience. Whether you're speaking with other growers, maybe you sort of move it a little bit one way. Whether it's with other roasters, you move it another way. I mean, you have that flexibility available to you.
Mm-hmm. With these companies with very unique names and names that are maybe closely tied to and associated with the founder, how do they work as the company grows and evolves? And, in 10 years' time, if Jen has 50 people working for her and 4 salespeople around the country, how does that sort of authenticity continue to work as a brand, though?
Yeah, I mean, the real mistake there is to name it after yourself. Particularly, well, I mean, I say that knowing I'm on a Boot Coffee webinar, and Willem and I have talked about this a fair bit, and he's very lucky. His last name is like a word that carries meaning, and and can be played with. And in Dutch, it means something different than English, and like that's kind of cool too. But when you name your company after yourself, you make it very hard for other people to follow in your footsteps. And and so if that means if you're looking to sell or have other people come in and help you, it just makes it that much more difficult, because if people aren't dealing with the person whose name's on the building, then they feel like they're getting second-class treatment. But if your name is more about an ethos or an idea or an audience or anything like that, then you're really just looking to hire people who believe in the same thing that you believe in. And if you do that, then they'll be able to convey the message with with some authenticity, because it means something to them. Anytime the answer to these things becomes, read what it says on this card, it will feel shitty. Just by virtue of that process. The process leads to that result. If there's an answer that's set in stone, nobody's going to be able to deliver that with any emotional resonance. So being able to have people like explain it in their own words and have that carry meaning for them is a lot more important than having like any sort of unity or guidelines where everybody's saying something exactly the same way.
Nice. And I guess, what about some nuts and bolts? We have a lot of folks on this call that are starting businesses or have businesses and are thinking about, coffee brands and things. Not to give away everything in your book or with your consulting services, of course, but where should people get started? Like Jen was batting ideas around with her husband at the dinner table.
That's a great place to get started. I think to her point, it's about getting out there, and and having those conversations with people and being clear about like what you want to do and how you want to communicate. So I think one really useful exercise is just to like write down, who you're doing this for, who's your audience, like who are you really trying to communicate with, what is your brand about, like what do you care about as a company, and then look at that and then see if that can apply to everyone in your industry or whether that can only apply to you. Because if you do that and your answer is, we want to source the best coffee and roast it with the best methods, with the finest trained people, like, okay, what percentage of the market do you think that statement applies to? And the worst part is it even applies to people who aren't actually doing those things because everybody likes to say they're the best. So if what you're going to do is just like join the market to tell people like we're premium, then you're wasting your time, because people have been doing that for a long time and people are going to believe the company that says they're premium that's been around since like 1898 or whatever, compared to you just showing up and say, no, we're premium. So, having a unique message, something that really, and like is unique and like is believable coming from you. Which has to do with like tying into your personality and not having it be just like something that you're applying after the fact. Jen, when you're talking about what you're doing, it cuts through all the layers. Like you're talking about who you're working with and where you're sourcing, and it like, your name and your brand, like be it intentional or not, like goes really deep into the process of what you're doing. And like that's authentic. And it's not authentic because you want it to be authentic. It's authentic because that's what you care about. and like that's the company and the vision that you wanted to build. And so, I challenge people to sort of write down, who they are and who they're trying to communicate with and what their values are and what's important to them. And then when you're coming up with names, when you're coming up with logos, like, okay, is there a connection here? Like, do these things speak the same language? Or is it just like some little like applique you're trying to put on after the fact?
No, that's amazing. Thank you. And there's some questions that have come in and chat with me about some old-fashioned companies, I guess you might call them now, but they're still relevant and successful, like Ford Motor Company and the legend about the naming of McDonald's. Do you think that it's kind of a different world now for companies and for brands that are trying to come up with an identity than it was 20 years ago, 50 years ago, 100 years ago? Or are these kind of fundamentals that maybe they feel different now because the world's different?
Yeah, so this thing happened in like the late 80s, early 90s called the internet. And when the internet happened, just, registrations, companies, like it exploded. So there's so many more names, more brands that are out there now that even to just register something or get to a place where you have your own territory is significantly harder than it was back then. That's just on like sort of a fundamental, basis. If we sort of zoom out and talk about like the question of, okay, well, there are very popular or successful companies that use a founder's name. Yes, that's true. Your name doesn't, or brand doesn't one-to-one equate with the success of your business. There's also lots of businesses that were named after their founders that imploded. Like, and everybody remember Wang Computer. It's like there's examples all over the place. And so, if there's plenty of examples of situations where there's like really successful, people who name something after themselves, and then there's like failures that do it, then there clearly isn't this like, causal relationship between those things. So where a name and a brand end up being really useful to you is getting off the ground, right? Is starting. Because when you're starting, nobody knows who you are and nobody cares about you. And you need to like get to a point where those two things are the case for an audience or a subset of an audience. And once you do that, then your brand starts to mean the experiences that you have with these people. Then if you have positive relationships with them, good experiences, then they will like your brand. If you have bad experiences with them, then your name and your brand will come to mean something terrible. It's like, look at why airlines rebrand after crashes. Because their brand is based on trust. And when they crash, nobody trusts them anymore. So, I think really the point to focus on is you're in a position where you're trying to like build, you're trying to recruit people, get people to sort of support your brand, to care about you and your mission and what you're doing. And if you have an interesting brand, it will be a very effective attractor to get them to a place where you can have those interactions and those conversations to really cement that for people. If you go through the work and you have an attractive brand and good language and you get to that place where like you bring people in and then you don't fulfill that promise, then branding's useless. Like, don't do it. Just white label it. Get someone else to do that for you. Because like all it does is get people in the door. And once they're in the door, it's up to you.
Mm-hmm. No, really, that's such important advice. And I want to shift gears just a little bit. And again, this comes from your website on Eli, on the 100 Monkeys site, on your page about your pro bono work.
Yeah.
And I think, this also, Don Bacon asked a question in chat for Jen, which, you've devoted a lot of pro bono time to the industry, Jen. And, he was asking specifically about She's the Roaster. And did you and that group do any sort of kind of more traditional marketing with that? Was it totally organic? What sort of facilitated the growth of that, where it's almost a household name, at least amongst the roasters that I'm talking to?
Sure. We didn't do any marketing. I mean, it's She's the Roaster has like zero money, so it's not a nonprofit because I don't have time to fill out the paperwork to be a 501c3. So, but it's a not for profit. So it has any money that comes through, which is through the sale of t-shirts, is just automatically sent back out, like donated in form of scholarship or something to help somebody get education so that we can have more women become roasters or become like roasting mentors and teachers and stuff. So, but really what it is just a visibility campaign. So it wouldn't, and we're not selling anything. That's the other thing too. So I don't necessarily think that, the branding strategy for She's the Roaster is not one that I would use for, say, Mother Tongue Coffee, if that makes sense,
Mm-hmm. No, 100%.
Mm-hmm. And I'm terrified of Instagram marketing ads and Facebook ads, and I have no idea what any of it means, and I'm scared to death of like, as a small business, I have no investment. It's just my own investment right now. Like my strategy with my business is to grow it for 2 years and and make sure that it has like sales and value before I consider bringing more people into my company. So it's just me, and it's funny when you type stuff up and you're like, we at Mother Tongue Coffee, we blah, blah, blah. And it's just me, so it's always like, and I always have to go back and change the I's to we and ours and, our mission or our goal or our key values. And so, for me, it's like every penny that I spend is a penny that can be spent in 5 million different directions. So I want to do, like, I see sponsored ads and stuff like that, but I have no idea how they work. I don't know what the return on investment is on those types of things. I think also like those types of ads too, kind of what Eli was saying is like, specifically with social media, it's about engagement and the experience of the person. Like, it's not like you just do an ad and then they buy your coffee. It's that there's a conversation that they want to have. And if you don't have somebody there to answer all of those questions and have those conversations with people, and it's a lot of work. And like, sometimes I come home and I'm on my phone and I'm working, but I am actually engaging with customers and people. And it feels like I'm just, playing or something, but it is work. So
No,
I don't know.
I hear you, Jen.
Yeah.
We're trying to up our social media game here as well. And it's a funny way to spend time because a lot of the folks that are reaching out and that we're engaging with are people we personally know as well. I'm sure that's true with your company, but it is kind of under the umbrella of a business relationship, not just shooting the breeze with friends. And that's challenging. And Eli, what, I want to hear sort of, you talk a little bit about 100 Monkeys and your approach to pro bono work, and if you're working with a nonprofit or a social enterprise, is that any different than working with kind of a more traditional company client as far as branding goals and naming goals?
Yeah, the people are a lot nicer and more grateful. I mean, really, yeah, we do. Traditionally, we do 6 pro bono projects a year. This year, we will do more than that. We're probably already at 6, would be my guess. We don't run the gamut. Like, we don't work with every, nonprofit that kind of comes through the door. We try to focus on the things that we really care about, which are environment, equality, our local community. I think those are probably our focal points. Also sort of tied in with the environment, like food supply, type of issues. And so I think one, it's really important for our team because it gives our team experience. It makes them feel like they're working on things that really value to them, which is important. And that's how we staff pro bono projects, is like who really cares about this? Because then they're going to give that project their all. And that's what we're after. Like, people care so much more about projects where they have a vested interest. And I think that applies to our pro bono projects, but it also applies to our normal projects, in that, like, one, we don't work with companies whose values we disagree with. And two, we want to work with people who are doing interesting things and who we feel like will be good clients. And if people are like skeptical of branding, or if they don't know if they want to rename, or something like this, like, we just say, all right, well, get back to us when you know. Because like, we're not here to like convince anybody to do anything. We've been doing this for too long. And I think honestly that influences our approach to social media and like engagement and stuff like that. Whereas like, we're very fortunate to be in a position where like more people want to work with us than we have time to work with them. And so we're not trying to attract anybody at this point. We just we get a ton of repeat and referral business, and prefer to keep it that way, because those people already know and like us. And so we don't have to sell them on anything or convince them of anything. And I think some of that's true, if you sort of try to apply it to coffee, and that like, one, you get to choose the people you have relationships with and the farms you have relationships with. But I think the part where it's different is that, if more people, like, if you want to sort of grow your base, then, and communicate with a larger portion of the audience, then yeah, you likely need to do some outreach to accomplish that. How you do it is completely different and totally up to you. And like, given Facebook's sort of corporate policy and their sort of political advocacy, like, we don't touch Facebook. And because I think they're a terrible company. And that, I know everybody doesn't believe that, and I know Facebook does a lot of good for a lot of people. But again, that's our values. And there's a ton of companies who would love to add Facebook to their list of clients. And so they can go work with one of them, and we can, work with somebody who's trying to help.
No, and I think that's really powerful. And that almost brings this conversation full circle for me a little bit, as as I was kind of getting my day started and just scrolling through LinkedIn and Instagram, and what really struck me on, here we are Monday morning, was the companies that have really sort of stepped up and put a flag in the sand around the events that are happening right now, right? The rampant racism that this country's faced for so many eons, and the fact that communities are rising up against that, really important things that are happening. And I was just surprised to see companies as diverse as like Vans, the shoe company, posting publicly about their commitment to looking inside and outside and changing in any ways that they must to address the more kind of implicit racism. And Blue Bottle closing down all of their cafes and donating $150,000 to Black Lives Matter and the NAACP and Bring the Heat. I mean, so I do think it is, just choosing not to work with Facebook is one example of that. But then, I'm curious, just from both of you, just your thoughts on kind of taking a very, active stand when something comes up that's really important to you. How do you navigate that as a brand and as a company? Of course, individually, we all have these feelings as well. Just any comments or thoughts?
Yeah, I can start. My daughter's joined us, so I don't know. She'll
Hi, Harper.
running around. But so a couple of things that I sort of, so I am a company of one right now, and it is my company. And so it's easier for me to make decisions. I didn't get to make these decisions when I was an employee of other companies. It wasn't, like, you have to, when you speak about things, you have to remember that you work for someone else, and somebody can make associations about things, So, but it's been easier now that I am my own company. So things that I support, like I donated a bunch of coffee to like KPFA because I'm super into like public radio, and I really support that what they give me, and I think that the public needs them, like desperately needs public radio, specifically KPFA in my local community. But and then also when COVID-19 happened, and everything went on lockdown, and at the same time, like all of my orders went away. Like I felt like I wanted to be supportive, but I also was in this sort of crisis situation with my business, seeing my orders go down. And at the end of the week, you have to roast minimum batches, and so I have all this leftover coffee that I can't sell. And I was like, well, I'm going to just donate them to hospitals because that's where my community needs coffee, right? And then I turned that into, I was talking to a friend, and I'm like, do you think any of my customers would be willing just to help me cover costs of this green, And so I put a button up, kind of like a tip button, $3 to $25, $50, and people did really pitch in, and it was amazing. And so now I have this sort of like cache of money that I'm able to like roast coffee. I can stay in business. I can also support my community. Everyone else can help support the community. And then it's interesting to think of that as like marketing, because I need to put it on my social media. So I have like all of these photos of me delivering coffee places, which proves authenticity, that not only did I ask you for this money to go for coffee, but I actually did roast it and deliver it to these communities. And so it's not just like, it's not like an ad and an ask. Like you can actually, it goes back to my core thing where I want your trust. I want you to trust that if I say I'm going to do something, I'm going to do it.
Yeah. No, I love that, Jen. And it's such a succinct and concrete example. So many companies do have like a social mission, maybe baked in much longer term. And, and I always challenge our clients. I'm like, that's great that you want to do that, but let's establish like, where you were and how you improved things, right? We've got to show that needle moving, which is what you're doing in a very authentic and genuine way.
I mean, with the political climate right now, like I've just been taking some time to think about how I can, whatever I end up doing, which I most likely will be doing something, but I have to have that, I want to be held accountable to people who buy coffee from me. I want them to hold me accountable. So whatever I do end up doing, I need to like publish the receipt or show them that I did it, not just, it has to be more than just like a statement post, so, and I haven't figured out exactly what that is yet. So I'm trying to figure it out. And I know that there are lots of links and opportunities and stuff. So
great. Thanks, Jen.
Yeah.
And we're at the top of the hour. So Eli, any parting thoughts or words on our session today, or?
Yeah, I just want to echo what Jen said. I think that's great. And that if you look at across the board, like the companies, the ways that they advertise right now, you see, to me, two really clear camps. One, companies that are trying to profit or who are scared and trying to just kind of show people, we get it. And those are the ads where you hear the like somber piano music in the beginning and they put their logo at the end. And they're not doing anything. There's no action tied to that. That's just them trying to like insert themselves in the conversation without having anything meaningful to say. And then there's the companies that actually do something and show you that they're doing something, right? That would be like Nike sponsoring Colin Kaepernick, or like any number of examples of, or Vans, like you said, right? There's like, so show it with action, do something, like do something meaningful and show people that you really mean it. And if you do that, then hey, you're doing all you can. You can continue to sort of explore what you're doing, explore your impact, and try to maximize that. But don't just put something up on social media saying like we care, or
Right.
we're saddened or whatever. It doesn't do anything for anybody.
Yeah, perfect. Well, that takes us to the end here. And I really, really appreciate Jen and Eli, you taking the time out of a Monday morning to join us. It's really, I think, important for us to stay connected with our friends in coffee and outside of coffee, and to introduce you to our larger network of folks that follow Boot Coffee. So thank you both. Just a couple of programming notes. We do have some of our paid webinars coming up, which you can register for and see the calendar at bootcoffee.com. I'm excited about these because they are so accessible and affordable, and we can hopefully reach many more people who are interested in learning. And also just a programming note, we're going to take these sessions to every other week, and we're going to move them to Thursday mornings, because I know it's sometimes a tough haul on Monday morning, first thing to queue up for these. So thank you, everybody. I really do appreciate, again, Jen and Eli and everybody else that joined our session this morning. Have a great week.
Thanks, guys.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.